Okay, guys, chapter 3 of Crime and Punishment. Next morning, he woke up late after a troubled sleep that did not refresh him. He awoke feeling bilious, bilious, short-tempered and uncharitable, and surveyed his little room with detestation. It was a tiny little cell about 6 paces long, and it presented a most pitiful aspect with its grimy yellow wallpaper that was everywhere coming off the walls. It was so low ceilinged that to a person of evenly slightly above average height, it felt claustrophobic, as though one might bang one's head against the plaster at any moment. The furniture was commensurate, commensurate, with its surroundings. There were 3 old chairs, not in very good condition, and in one corner a painted table on which lay a few books and exercise books. From the mere fact that they were covered in dust, it could be seen that it was a long time since anyone had touched them, and a big, ungainly sofa, which took up practically the whole of one wall and half the width of the room, had at one time had an upholstering of chintz, chintz, but was now in rags and served as Raskolnikov's bed. So he slept on a couch, sofa. He often slept on it as he was, without bothering to undress, without a sheet, covering himself with his old threadbare student's coats and resting his head on a single small pillow beneath which he put all the linen he possessed, clean and soiled, to give some extra height. In front of the sofa there was a little table. It would have been hard to go much further, to cede or to sink to a lower level of personal neglect. But to Raskolnikov, in his present state of mind, this was actually gratifying. He had, in no uncertain terms, withdrawn from everyone like a tortoise into its shell, and even the face of the maidservant, whose task it was to wait upon him, and who sometimes peeped into his room, irritated him to the point of bile, B-I-L-E, and convulsions. This is often the case with a certain kind of monomaniac who spends all his time thinking too much about something. It was now 2 weeks since his landlady had stopped supplying him with meals, yet he would never have dreamed of going down to argue with her, even though he went without his dinner. As a matter of fact, Nastasia, the landlady's cook and only servant, was really somewhat pleased by this attitude on the part of the lodger, and had completely given up tidying and sweeping his quarters, except for the odd occasion, roughly once a week, when she poked her broom into them almost by accident. It had been who just now had woken him up. What, are you still sleeping? It's time to get up, she shouted, standing over him. It's nearly gone 10. I've brought you some tea. Do you want it, or are you just going to waste away to nothing? The lodger opened his eyes, gave a start, and recognized Nastasia. What's this? Tea from the landlady? He asked, slowly and painfully raising himself on the sofa. You've got a hope. She set before him her own cracked teapot containing a weak brew of tea made with used leaves, and placed beside it 2 yellow lumps of sugar. Here, Nastasia, take this, please, he said, fumbling in his pocket. He had been sleeping in his clothes, and pulling from it a small handful of copper change. Go out and buy me a roll, and get me a bit of sausage at the sausage dealer's, the cheapest they have. I'll get you the roll in a minute, but won't you have some cabbage soup instead of the sausage? It's good stuff. I made it yesterday. I left some for you yesterday, but you were too late. It's good stuff. She's being nice to him, huh? When the cabbage soup had been brought in and he had to work on it, Nastasia seated herself beside him on the sofa and began to chatter away. She was a country girl, and a very indiscreet one, too. Praskovya Pavlovna says she's going to complain about you to the police, she said. He frowned hard. To the police? What's bothering her? You don't pay your rent, but you don't quit the room. It's easy to see what's bothering her. The devil, that's all I needed, he muttered, gritting his teeth. No, this isn't the right time. Not now. She's a fool, he added loudly. I'll go and see her today, have a word with her. He's saying that. Fool, she may be just the same as me, but what's a clever fellow like you doing lying there like a lump, with never a sound or a sight of you? You said before you used to go and give lessons to children, but now you don't do anything. Why? Oh, but I do something, Raskolnikov said sternly and reluctantly. What? Work. What sort of work? Thinking, he replied seriously after a brief silence. Nastasia fairly rolled with laughter. She was a giggly sort of girl. When anything set her off, she would laugh inaudibly, shaking and swaying with her whole body until she began to feel sick. Thought up a lot of money, have you? She managed to get out at last. One can't go and give lessons to children if one doesn't have any boots. Oh, in any case, I don't give a spit. Don't spit in the well, will you? They pay one in coppers for giving lessons to children. What can one do with the few kopecks? He went on reluctantly as if he were trying to find answers to his own thoughts. Oh, so you want all the capital at once, do you? He gave her a strange look. Yes, all the capital, he replied firmly after a slight pause. Well, take it easy or you'll end up frightening me. You've made me quite terrified. Do you want me to go and get you that roll or not? As you wish. Oh, I forgot. There was a letter for you yesterday. It came when you weren't here. A letter for me? From whom? I don't know. I had to give the postman 3 kopecks out of my own money. Will you give me them back, eh? Oh, go and get it. For God's sake, go and get it, Raskolnikov shouted, thoroughly excited. Lord in heaven. A moment later, the letter made its appearance. It was, as he thought, from his mother in the province of R dash. I guess it doesn't, they never say the location. He actually turned, let me show you. It says R dash. See that? He actually turned pale as he took it. It was a long time since he had had any letters. Now, however, his heart was wrung by some other quite different emotion. Nastasia, in the name of heaven, please go now. Here are your 3 kopecks. Only, for God's sake, go. The letter trembled in his hands. He was reluctant to open it in her presence. He wanted to be left alone with this letter. When Nastasia had gone, he quickly brought it to his lips and kissed it. Then for a long time he peered closely at the handwriting of the address, at the dear, familiar, fine and slanting script of his mother, who had once upon a time taught him to read and write. He lingered over it. He even seemed to be afraid of something. At last, he broke the seal. The letter was a big, thick one, 2 lots in weight. The 2 large sheets of notepaper were entirely covered in microscopic handwriting. So, we're going to read the letter now. My dear Rodya, his mother wrote. I guess she calls him Rodya, R-O-D-Y-A. It is now more than 2 months since I last spoke to you by letter, and I've suffered on that account. Some nights I haven't even been able to sleep for thinking about it. But I know you won't blame me for this unwished-for silence of mine. Silence of mine. You know how I love you. You're the only one we think of, Dunya and I. You're everything to us, all our hopes and aspirations rolled into one. How terrible I felt when I learned that a few months ago you dropped out of the university because you couldn't manage to support yourself and that your lessons and your other means of income had come to a stop. How could I possibly help you when I have only my pension of 120 rubles a year? The 15 rubles I sent you 4 months ago I borrowed, as you yourself know, on the strength of that pension from Afanasy Ivanovich Vakrushin, a local merchant. He's a good, kind man, and he was one of your father's friends, but having given him the right to receive the pension in my stead, I've had to wait until the debt was paid off, and this has only just happened now, so I've not been able to send you anything all this time. But now, thank God, I think I'll be able to send you a bit more, and indeed, in general, we can now actually boast of our good fortune, which is what I'm in such a hurry to tell you about. In the first place, dear Rod, would you believe if I told you that for the past 6 weeks your sister has been living here with me, and that we're not going to be parted ever again? Thank the Lord, her torments are at an end, but I shall tell you it all in sequence, so you'll see what's been going on and what it is we've been hiding from you until now. When you wrote about 2 months ago and told me that you've heard from someone that Dunya was putting up with a lot of rudeness in the Svidrigalov's household and asked me for a detailed explanation, what could I have written you in reply? If I'd given you the whole truth, you would probably have dropped everything and come to see us, on foot even, if you had to, because I know your temperament and feelings, and you would have stood up for your sister. I was in despair myself, but what could I do? At that time, not even I knew the whole truth. The main problem was that when Dunya entered their household last year in the capacity of governess, she was given no less than 100 rubles in advance, but was told that a certain amount would be deducted from her salary each month, thus making it impossible for her to leave her post without having paid off her debt. This sum, now I can explain everything to you, my precious Radia. She accepted principally in order to be able to send you the 60 rubles you needed so badly at the time in which you got from us last year. We deceived you then, wrote and told you that it was a sum of money Dunya had managed to save from her previous job, but that wasn't true. I'm able to tell you the whole truth now because everything has suddenly, by God's will, changed for the better. And I do it also so you will know how much Dunya loves you and what a wonderful, warm heart she has. Mr. Svidrigailov was indeed rude to her and made various impolite suggestions and sneering remarks to her at table. But at table, meaning, I don't know, they were eating or something. But I don't want to enter into all those distressing details, for they will just upset you for nothing. I mean, it's all over now. To cut a long story short, in spite of the kind and decent treatment she received from Marfa Petrovna, Mr. Svidrigaïlov's wife, and all the rest of the family, Dunya had a very hard time of it. Particularly when Mr. Svidrigaïlov, following an old regimental custom of his, happened to be under the influence of Bacchus, Bacchus, maybe a type of drink. But what do you think turned out to be the case later on? Just imagine that madcap, Madcap, had long had a hankering after Dunya, but had been concealing it beneath a facade of rudeness and contempt towards her. Guess he liked her. Perhaps he himself was ashamed and kept falling into a state of horror when he viewed himself, now getting on in years and the father of a family possessed by such frivolous hopes, and for that reason could not help acting towards Dunya in a hostile manner. It might also have been that his rude behavior and sneering were an attempt to conceal the truth from others. In the end, however, he could not restrain himself and dared to make Dunya an open and base proposition, holding out various rewards to her, and telling her into the bargain that he would give up everything and move with her to another estate or possibly even abroad. You can imagine the suffering she went through. To leave her post at once was impossible, not only because of the money she owed, but also because she wished to spare the feelings of Marfa Petrovna, who might have suddenly had suspicions, and she would consequently end up sowing dissension in the family. Why, it would have been a major scandal for Dunya, too. There would have been no getting out of it. In fact, there were all sorts of reasons why Dunya could on no account expect to be able to escape from that dreadful household. Of course, you know Dunya, you know how clever she is and what a firm character she has. Dunya had put up with all sorts of things, and even in the most extreme situations, she's able to find enough generosity of spirit within herself so as not to lose her firmness. She even didn't put it all in her letters in order not to upset me, yet we frequently wrote to each other to exchange news. The denouement was quietly unexpected. Marfa Petrovna chanced to overhear her husband pleading with Dunya in the garden and, misinterpreting it all, accused her of the whole thing, supposing that she was the one who was the cause of it all. In the garden there immediately took place a dreadful scene. Marfa Petrovna actually hit Dunya, wouldn't listen to a word she had to say, spent a whole hour shouting, and finally gave orders for her to be taken to me in the town in a simple peasant's cart, into which they hurled all her belongings, her linen and her clothes, all any old how. Her linen and her clothes, all any old how, without any bailing, B-A-L-I-N-G, or packing. And then it started to pour with rain, and Dunya, insulted and disgraced, had to drive in an open cart, sitting beside a muzhik, M-U-Z-H-I-K, all 17 versts of the way. Think now what sort of letter I could have written you in reply to the one I had from you 2 months ago. What could I have put in it? I myself was in despair. I didn't dare write you the truth because you would have been very unhappy, aggrieved, and indignant, and what could you have done? You would only have made yourself worse than you already were, and in any case, Dunya wouldn't allow it. And I couldn't just fill the letter with rubbish about this, that, and the other when I had such misery in my soul. For all of a month, our whole town was rife with rumors concerning this episode, and it came to the point where Dunya and I couldn't even go to church for the contemptuous stares and whispers we received. People even talked about us in our presence. As for our friends, they all shunned us, even stopped saying hello to us. And I obtained certain knowledge that the merchants, shop boys, and some office clerks were out to do a beastly thing to us, tarred the front entrance of the building where we lived so that our landlords would give us notice to quit our apartment. At the bottom of all this was Marfa Petrovna, who had succeeded in putting the blame on Dunya and blackening her character in every household. She knows everyone in our town, and that month she made visits here practically by the minute, and since she's a bit indiscreet and likes talking about her family matters, and in particular complaining about her husband to all and sundry, which is a really horrible thing to do, within a short space of time she not only spread the whole story all over town, but over the whole district too. I felt ill, but Dunya was stronger than I was, and you should have seen the way she bore it all, and yet managed to console me and keep my spirits up at the same time. She's an angel. Dunya, I love Dunya. However, by the mercy of God, our torments were cut short. Mr. Svidrigaïlov thought the better of it and repented, probably having taken pity on Dunya. He presented Marfa Petrovna with the complete and tangible proof of Dunya's innocence in the form of a letter which, before Marfa Petrovna had caught them in the garden together, Dunya had been compelled to write and to give it to him in order to put a stop to the personal declarations and secret rendezvous on which he had been insisting, in which after Dunya's departure had remained in the hands of Mr. Svidrigaïlov. In this letter she rebuked him in the most fiery manner, full of indignation for the infamy of his conduct towards Marfa Petrovna, put him reprovingly in the mind of the fact that he was a father and a family man, and that, moreover, it was vile of him to torment and make even more unhappy a girl whose unhappiness and defenselessness were bad enough. In a word, dear Radna, this letter was written so nobly and movingly that I sobbed as I read it, and even to this day I can't read it without tears. In addition, Dunya's good name was cleared by the testimony of the servants who had seen and who knew far more than Mr. Svidrigailov had ever supposed, as is always the case in such situations. Marfa Petrovna was utterly shocked and destroyed anew, as she herself confessed, but was on the other hand entirely convinced of Dunya's innocence, and on the next day, on the Sunday, coming straight to the church, went down on her knees and in the tears begged the Queen of Heaven to give her the strength to endure this new ordeal and to fulfill her duty. Then, fresh from church, without bothering to look in anywhere else, she came straight to us, told us everything, wept bitterly, and in complete repentance, embraced Dunya and begged her to forgive her. That same morning, wasting no time, she went straight from us to all the houses in town, and every one of them, in terms most flattering to Dunya, shedding floods of tears, reestablished Dunya's innocence and the nobility of her emotions and behavior. Not only that, she showed and read aloud to everyone that letter Dunya had written in her own hand to Mr. Svidrigailov, and even allowed people to make copies of it, which I consider is going a bit too far. Thus it was that she had to spend several days going round to everyone in town, as some people began to get offended that others had been shown preference, and thus it was that queues, Queues, began to form, so that in every house people were waiting for it to be their turn, and everyone knew that on such and such day Marfa Petrovna would be reading the letter in this house or that house, and present at every reading of it would be even those people who had already heard the letter several times in their own homes and those of their friends. It's my opinion that she went far too far, but that's the sort of woman Marfa Petrovna is. At any rate, she completely restored Dunya's honor, and the entire vileness of the whole affair has come to rest at the door of her husband, he being the principal culprit, as an indelible disgrace, so that I actually feel sorry for him. They dealt with that madcap far too harshly. Dunya was immediately invited to go and give lessons in several households, but she refused. In general, everyone started treating her with particular respect. All of this was more than anything else instrumental in bringing about the unexpected circumstance by virtue of which it may be said that our entire fortunes are now changing. I must tell you, dear Radna, that a bachelor has been seeking Dunya's hand in marriage, and that she has now given her consent, a fact of which I hasten to notify you at the earliest possible moment. And although this is something that was done without consulting you, I'm sure you won't bear your sister or myself any grudge, as you will see yourself from the facts of the case that it would have been impossible for us to wait and postpone our decision until we had your reply. And you yourself couldn't have formed a proper, detailed judgment without being here. It happened like this. He's already a lieutenant colonel in the civil service. His name is Fyodor Petrovich Luzhin, and he's a distant relative of Marfa Petrovna, who's had a lot to do with the whole business. It began with him conveying through her his desire to make our acquaintance. We received him in the proper manner. He had coffee with us, and the next day he sent us a letter in which he very politely made his proposal, asking for a swift and definite reply. He's a man of business, he's hard at work, and he's now in a hurry to get to St. Petersburg, so every moment is precious to him. Of course, at first we were very shocked, as it all happened so suddenly and unexpectedly. We both spent the whole of that day weighing the pros and cons and thinking about the matter. He's a trustworthy and well-to-do man, has two positions, and already has capital of his own. It's true that he's already 45, but he has a very pleasant appearance and may still be attractive to women. And in general, he's a very decent and respectable man, just a bit arrogant and on the gloomy side. But that may just be how he appears at first sight. Now I warn you, dear Radna, that when you meet him in St. Petersburg, which will be very soon now, you mustn't judge him too quickly and hastily the way you usually do when you don't like something about somebody at first glance. I say this just in case, as I'm certain he'll make a pleasant impression on you. Indeed, in order to get to know anyone at all, it is necessary to approach them cautiously and by stages, so as not to jump to erroneous conclusions which may be very hard to correct and make amends for afterwards. And there are many grounds for believing that Fyodor Petrovich is a highly honorable man. On his first visit to us, he told us that he's a positive man, but that he shares, as he himself put it, the convictions of our most recent generations, and is an enemy to all forms of prejudice. He said a great many other things too, because he's a little vain and is rather fond of making other people listen to him, but I mean that scarcely amounts to a sin. I didn't understand much of it, of course, but Dunya explained to me that even though he's not a man of great education, he is nonetheless intelligent, and it would appear kind. You know what your sister's like, Radia. She's a steadfast, sensible, patient, and magnanimous girl. though she has a very fiery heart, something I've come to know very well. Of course, neither on his side nor on hers is there any great love, but Dunya, quite apart from being a clever girl, is at the same time a being as noble as an angel, and she will make it her duty to constitute the happiness of her husband, who in his turn will care about hers. Of this last we have as yet no major reason to doubt, though I must admit that the whole thing has happened a bit quickly. What's more, he's a very prudent man, and he naturally sees that his own conjugal bliss will be that bit more secure the happier Dunya is being married to him. And as for a few roughness of character, old habits, and even a certain lack of harmony with regard to ideas, something that is impossible to avoid even in the most happy of marriages, on that score, Dunya herself has told me that she has faith in herself, that there is no reason to worry, and that she will be able to put up with a great deal just as long as their future relationship is an honest and fair one. I also found him a bit hard-mannered at first, but I mean it could be just that he's a straightforward sort of man, and I'm sure that's what it is. For example, on his second visit, when he had Dunya's consent, he said during the course of the conversation that even in the days before he had met Dunya, he had decided to marry an honest girl, but one without a dowry, and she must be the kind of girl who already knew what poverty was like, because, as he explained, a husband must in no way be beholden to his wife, and it's always far better if the wife views the husband as her benefactor. I should add that he put in terms that were somewhat gentler and more affectionate than the ones I have used. I'm afraid I've forgotten his actual words and remember only the general sense. What's more, he didn't say it in any carefully thought-out sort of way. It was obviously something he blurted out in the heat of the conversation, as afterwards he even tried to correct and soften what he said. But even so, it did sound a bit on the hard side of me, and I said to Dunya later on, but Dunya came back at me with a fair amount of irritation, saying that words aren't deeds, which is, of course, true. During the night before she made up her mind, Dunya suffered from insomnia, and assuming me to be already asleep, got up from her bed and spent the hours walking up and down the room. At last, she got down on her knees and prayed fervently in front of the icon. In the morning, she told me that she'd taken her decision. She's just nervous, it's a big decision. I've already mentioned that Fyodor Petrovich is now on his way to St. Petersburg. He has an important case to attend to there, and he wants to open a public lawyer's office in the capital. For a long time now, he's been engaged in the pursuance of various actions and lawsuits, and only the other day he actually won an important suit. It is essential for him to go to St. Petersburg now, as he has an important case in the Senate court. So, dear Rania, he may be extremely useful to you in all sorts of ways, and in fact, Dunya and I have already come to the conclusion that it would be perfectly possible for you, starting this very day, to begin putting a career together for yourself, and that you could consider your future already clearly marked out. Oh, just think if that were really to be so. That would be such a wonderful thing that we should have to consider it as nothing less than a direct act of charity to us from the Almighty. Dunya dreams of nothing else. We've already taken the risk of saying a few words about it to Fyodor Petrovich. He expressed himself cautiously and said that naturally, since he won't be able to do without a secretary, it would of course make more sense to pay the salary to a relative rather than a stranger, as long as he turns out to have an aptitude for the post, as though in your case there could be any doubt of that. But then he voiced some doubts as to whether your university studies would leave you time to keep office hours with him. That was as far as the matter went on the occasion, but now Dunya can't keep her mind on anything else. For several days now, she's simply been in a kind of fever, and she's already dreamed up a whole scheme whereby you'll eventually become Fyodor Petrovich's friend and even his partner in his legal business. Especially since you're in the faculty of law, I must say, Radia, that I'm completely in agreement with her and share all her hopes and plans, as they seem to be perfectly capable of realization. And in spite of Fyodor Petrovich's present unwillingness to be pinned down, which stems from the fact that he doesn't know you yet, Dunya is firmly convinced that she'll achieve it all by the good influence that she'll have on her future husband, and of that there is no dissuading her. Of course, we have been careful not to say anything to Fyodor Petrovich about any of these long-term dreams of ours, particularly the one about you becoming his partner. He's a positive man. I think he would take it rather amiss, as it would all seem to him just a lot of fancies. By the same lights, neither Dunya nor I have yet said so much as a word to him on the subject of our fervent hope that he'll help us to supply you with money while you're still in the university. We didn't mention it in the first place because it's something that will come of its own accord later on, and he'll probably offer something of the kind himself without being asked. I'd like to see him refuse Dunya that. All the more so because you yourself may be able to become his right-hand man in the office and receive this assistance not as charity but as a salary that you have earned. That's the way Dunya wants to arrange it, and I'm in complete agreement with her. In the second place, we didn't say anything about it because when you meet him now, I particularly want to set you off on an equal footing with him. When Denya spoke of you to him with warm enthusiasm, he replied that in order to be able to judge someone, it's necessary to examine him for oneself, and at close quarters, and that he would reserve the privilege of forming an opinion about you until he had had a chance of getting to know you a bit. Do you know, my precious Radia, I think that for various reasons, which I hasten to add, have nothing whatsoever to do with Fyodor Petrovich, but are just a result of my own personal and possibly even womanish female whims. I think that I may possibly do better if after the marriage I continue to live on my own as I do at present, and not together with them. I'm quite certain that he'll have the decency and sensitivity to invite me to live with him, and propose that I not be parted from my daughter anymore, and that even though he hasn't said anything about it so far, that's just because I'm supposed to take it for granted without being asked. But I shall refuse. Several times in my life I have noticed that mothers-in-laws are not much to man's liking, and not only do I not want to be even the least little bit of a burden to anyone, I want to be completely independent for as long as I have my own crust of bread to eat and children, such as Dunya and yourself. If I can, I'll find somewhere to live that's not too far from you both, because Radia, I've been saving the best bit of my letter for the end. Let me tell you, my dear friend, that soon, possibly very soon indeed, we shall all meet again and put our arms around one another, all three of us, not having seen one another for 3 years. It's quite definitely been decided that Dunya and I are to travel to St. Petersburg. Exactly when, I don't know, but at any rate, it will be very, very soon, even possibly within the week, to St. Petersburg. Everything depends on the instructions we receive from Pyotr Petrovich, who will let us know as soon as he has had a chance to get his bearings in St. Petersburg. Because of certain special considerations, he wants to get the wedding ceremony over with as soon as possible and hold the reception in the days remaining before Shrovetide, or if that should not prove to be possible as time is so short, then immediately after the Gospel Shinki, Gospozhinki. Oh, with what happiness I shall press you to be. Oh, with what happiness I shall press you to my heart. Dunya is wild with excitement and joy about the prospect of seeing you again, and she once said in jest that alone made it worthwhile to marry Pyotr Petrovich. She's an angel. She isn't writing you anything for the moment, but she's told me to write and say that there are many things she wants to talk about with you, so many things that her hand won't lift to grasp the pen, because one can't write everything in a few lines and just ends by upsetting oneself. She told me to send you a big hug and kisses without number, but in spite of the fact that we may very soon be meeting face to face, I shall still send you as much money as I can in a few days' time. Now that everyone knows that Dunya is going to marry Pyotr Petrovich, my credit has suddenly shot up, and I know for a fact that Afanasy Ivanovich will now let me have as much as 75 rubles on account of my pension, so I may be able to send you 25 or even 30. I would have sent even more, but I'm afraid of how much our travel costs may come to, and although Pyotr Petrovich was so kind as to fund a part of the expenses for our journey to the capital out of his own pocket, and has in fact offered to forward our luggage and big trunk for us, they'll be sent via friends of his, but even so, we'll still have to keep enough for our arrival in St. Petersburg, where one can't show one's face if one is penniless, not in the early days at least. Actually, however, Dunya and I have already worked it all out exactly, and it seems that in fact the journey itself won't cost very much. Where we live is only 90 versts from the railway. 90 versts, versts, from the railway, and we've already come to an arrangement with a music wagon driver we know. I think it's music, huh? But it's Muzhik. And we've already come to an arrangement with a music wagon driver we know, just in case. And when we get to the train, Dunya and I will be quite happy to travel third class. So perhaps I'll manage to send you 30 rubles, and not 25, in fact. I'm sure I will, but that's enough. I've covered both sides of 2 whole sheets with writing, and there's no room left for any more. There you have our whole story. Goodness, what a lot of things to happen at once. And now, my precious Radia, I embrace you until our imminent meeting and send you my maternal blessing. Radia, love Dunya, that sister of yours. Love her as she loves you, and realize that she loves you infinitely, more than she does herself. She's an angel, and you, Radia, you're everything to us. All our hopes and aspirations roll into one. If only you were happy, so should we be. Do you say your prayers, Radia, the way you used to? And do you believe in the mercy of the Creator and our Redeemer? I fear in my heart that you may have been affected by this latest fashion of unbelief. If that's the case, then I pray for you. Remember, my darling, how, when you were still only a child, in the days when your father was still alive, you used to babble your prayers on my knees, and how happy we all were then. Goodbye, or rather, until we meet again. I hug you tight as tight and send you kisses without number. Yours to the tomb, Pulcheria Raskolnikova. Her name's Pulcheria, Pulkheria. Raskol, Raskolnikova, Raskolnikova. So his name is Radya Raskolnikova, Radya, Rodya. So that's the end of that letter, but the chapter continues. For almost the whole time it took him to read the letter, right from its very beginning. Raskolnikov's face was wet with tears, but when he had finished, it was pale and distorted with a nervous twitch, and a nasty, lugubrious, jaundiced smile snaked across his lips. He put his head on his thin, threadbare pillow and thought for a long time. His heart was beating violently, and his thoughts were violently agitated. At last he began to feel suffocated and claustrophobic in this little yellow room that was more like a cupboard or a trunk. His eyes and his brain craved space. He grabbed his hat and went out, this time without fear of running into anyone on the stairs. He had forgotten about that. His path lay in the direction of Vasily Island by way of V Prospect, and he looked as though he were hurrying there on business. He walked, however, in his customary manner without noticing where he was going, whispering to himself and even talking aloud to himself, something that was a great source of wonder to passerbys. Many of them thought he was drunk. That was the end of chapter 3. Man, it's crazy, that last part when she's talking about how he used to pray. Kind of like thinking about myself and how I've been having a lack of faith. It's crazy how an author could write all this. It's insane.